The call from my uncle's lawyer came on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of debugging code that would eventually revolutionize quantum computing. The same code my family had mocked as a glorified calculator for the past 5 years. Mr. Calloway, I regret to inform you that your uncle, Edward Thornton, passed away yesterday evening. I stared out the window of my modest apartment at the university campus where I worked as an unremarkable assistant professor. Unremarkable, my father's word, not mine. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuine sadness mixing with surprise. Uncle Edward had been the only family member who'd ever shown interest in my work. Mr. Thornton's will stipulates that you attend the reading tomorrow at our offices in Boston. All beneficiaries must be present. I almost laughed. Beneficiaries? My name and inheritance had never appeared in the same sentence in my family. My name is Daniel Calloway, 32, perpetual disappointment to the illustrious Thornton Calloway financial dynasty. While my cousins have followed the family path into investment banking and hedge funds, I'd chosen theoretical physics and computer science. An unforgivable detour from the family legacy. I'll be there, I told the lawyer, already mentally rearranging my lectures and lab time. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from my cousin Victor. Heard about the will reading. Don't get your hopes up, Danny. Uncle Edward was just being polite, including you. Victor had been the golden child since we were boys. Captain of the lacrosse team, Harvard Business School, summer internships at Goldman Sachs. Now he managed the family's primary investment fund, which my father and aunt had entrusted to him despite his mediocre track record. I didn't bother responding. Victor's taunts had lost their sting somewhere around the time I published my third peer-reviewed paper on quantum algorithmic stability. The next day, I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Harrington and Associates, distinctly underdressed in my university blazer among my family's bespoke suits. My father, Thomas Calloway, barely acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. My Aunt Elizabeth studied her manicure. Victor and his sister Claudia whispered to each other, occasionally glancing in my direction with poorly concealed smirks. Uncle Edward had been the family's eccentric outlier, brilliant with numbers but uninterested in the flashy wealth that obsessed the rest of them. He'd made his fortune in advanced statistical analysis for financial markets, then retired early to pursue his passion for pure mathematics and theoretical physics, which explained our occasional lunches and his curious questions about my research. Morton Harrington, a silver-haired attorney with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and began reading the will. To my sister Elizabeth and my brother-in-law Thomas, I leave my vacation properties in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard, along with the sum of $1 million each. My father and aunt exchanged satisfied glances, exactly what they'd expected. To my niece Claudia, I leave my collection of art and antiquities, valued at approximately $4 million. Claudia brushed imaginary lint from her channel suit, her expression suggesting this was merely her due. To my nephew Victor, I leave my membership shares in the Sterling Club and my vintage car collection. Victor's smile faltered slightly. The assets were valuable, certainly, but nowhere near what he clearly anticipated. The remainder of my estate, continued Harrington, including my primary residence, investment holdings, and controlling interest in Thornton Analytics, I leave to my nephew, Daniel Calloway, contingent upon certain conditions. The room went silent, then erupted. This is absurd, my father sputtered, his face reddening. Daniel knows nothing about running a company. There must be a mistake, Aunt Elizabeth insisted, leaning forward. Edward wouldn't leave the bulk of his estate to the family disappointment? I offered quietly. Harrington raised a hand for silence. The bequest comes with specific conditions, as I mentioned. Mr. Thornton left a letter explaining everything. He handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Uncle Edward's precise handwriting. What conditions? Victor demanded. What's in that letter? That's between Mr. Thornton and Daniel, Harrington replied firmly. Now, regarding the distribution of assets. How much? My father's voice cut through the attorney's explanation. How much is he getting? Harrington consulted his papers, though I suspected he knew the figure by heart. Mr. Thornton's total estate, excluding the specific bequests already mentioned, is valued at approximately $87 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. My cousin stared at me with naked shock and resentment. This is ridiculous, Victor finally said. Uncle Edward was clearly not in his right mind. We'll contest the will. Mr. Thornton underwent thorough psychological evaluation when he updated his will 6 months ago. Harrington countered smoothly. The documentation is impeccable. Additionally, there's a no contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will forfeits their inheritance entirely. Victor subsided, though fury still radiated from him. The meeting concluded with details about asset transfers and paperwork. Throughout it all, I sat quietly, the unopened letter burning a hole in my pocket. As we prepared to leave, my father approached me for the first time in over a year. Whatever game Edward was playing, this company is beyond your capabilities, he said, his voice low. You should sell your shares to Victor. They'll give you fair market value. I met his gaze steadily. I haven't even read Uncle Edward's letter yet. Maybe I should do that before making any decisions. Don't be stubborn, Daniel. You're a researcher, not a businessman. I'm actually many things, Dad. You just never bothered to find out what they were. Back in my apartment that evening, I finally opened the letter. Uncle Edward's familiar handwriting filled several pages. My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, I've finally managed to escape the tedious board meetings and charity galas that consumed far too much of my life. Don't be too sad. By the time you receive this, I'll have already embarked on the ultimate intellectual adventure. You're wondering why I've left you the bulk of my estate when I could have followed family tradition and bestowed it upon the proper heirs. The answer is simple. You're the only one who might understand what to do with it. For the past 3 years, I've been watching your research with growing interest. Your work in quantum algorithmic systems isn't just brilliant, it's revolutionary, but you've been solving only half the equation. The other half is at Thornton Analytics. My company hasn't just been analyzing financial markets. We've been collecting and processing data on a scale few organizations can match. The patterns we've identified, combined with your quantum computing approaches, could change everything. Your inheritance comes with 2 conditions. First, you must not sell your shares in Thornton Analytics for at least 1 year. Second, you must review the research files in my home office safe, accessible with the enclosed key. The combination is the publication date of your first paper on quantum algorithmic stability. Your family will pressure you to sell. They'll belittle your abilities and question your competence. They've been doing this your entire life, so I imagine you're quite used to it by now. What they don't understand, what they've never understood, is that true wealth isn't measured in acquisitions or social status. It's measured in ideas. And you, Daniel, have the most valuable ideas of anyone I've ever met. Do what you think is right, but know this. I didn't leave you my company because you're my nephew. I left it to you because you're the only person I trust with its future. With confidence in your judgment, Edward. I stared at the letter for a long time, then at the small key that had fallen from the envelope. I hadn't cried when I'd heard of Uncle Edward's death. Our relationship, while friendly, hadn't been particularly close. But reading his words, understanding his faith in my work, brought tears to my eyes. My phone began buzzing with messages from family members, alternating between congratulations and thinly veiled suggestions that I sell my unexpected windfall. I ignored them all. The next morning, I drove to Uncle Edward's estate in Cambridge, my estate now, according to Harrington. The sprawling Victorian mansion was impressive but understated, much like Edward himself. The housekeeper greeted me with a knowing smile, as if she'd been expecting me for years rather than hours. Professor Calloway, she said, Mr. Thornton said you'd be coming. His office is ready for you. Uncle Edward's home office occupied the entire 3rd floor, a vast space filled with books, mathematical models, and computer equipment far more sophisticated than I'd expected. The safe was hidden behind a sliding panel in the bookcase, just as his letter had described. The combination worked on the first try. Inside was a single external hard drive and another note. The password is the theorem you explained to me over lunch last spring. The one that made me spill my wine. I smiled at the memory. I'd been explaining a particularly elegant solution to a quantum decoherence problem, and Edward had become so excited he'd knocked over his glass, staining the white tablecloth crimson. The hard drive contained terabytes of data, financial records, market analyses, communication patterns, resource distributions, collected over decades. At first glance, it seemed like standard analytical research, albeit extraordinarily comprehensive. But as I dug deeper, I began to see what Edward had meant about the other half of the equation. His company hadn't just been tracking financial patterns. They'd been modeling complex systems interactions on a global scale. Climate variables, population movements, resource allocations, technological development curves, all interconnected in a vast dynamic model. And the model was showing severe instabilities. According to Edwards' projections, the global financial system was heading toward a catastrophic failure point within the next 18 to 24 months. Not just a recession or market correction, but a fundamental structural collapse that would make the 2008 financial crisis look like a minor hiccup. More disturbing still, several major investment firms, including the Callaway Family Fund managed by Victor, were engaged in exactly the high-risk strategies that would accelerate and amplify the coming crash. I spent the entire day and most of the night analyzing Edwards' data, confirming his conclusions with my own calculations. By dawn, I was convinced he was right. The system was far more fragile than anyone realized, and the coming crash would be devastating. But there was something else. In his notes, Edward had speculated that my quantum algorithmic approach might offer a solution, a way to identify and strengthen the weak points in the system before collapse became inevitable. He hadn't worked out the details. That, apparently, was my inheritance. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the night. As the sun rose, I finally checked it. Dozens of missed calls and messages from family members, each more insistent than the last. The most recent was from Victor. Board meeting at Thornton Analytics tomorrow at 10 a.m. Attendance mandatory for major shareholders. Time to discuss the company's future. They weren't wasting any time. I arrived at Thornton Analytics headquarters the next morning to find the boardroom already filled with tense, expectant faces. Victor sat at the head of the table, a position he'd apparently assigned himself. My father and aunt flanked him, with various board members and executives filling the remaining seats. "Ah, the prodigal nephew arrives," Victor said with a tight smile. "We were just discussing transition strategies." "Transition to what?" I asked, taking the only empty seat at the opposite end of the table from Victor. "Practical leadership," my father answered. "Edward's bequest, while well-intentioned, has placed the company in an untenable position. You have no experience in finance or corporate management. We've prepared a very generous offer," Victor continued, sliding a folder toward me. "Well above market value for your shares. You'll be set for life, and the company will continue under experienced leadership." I didn't open the folder. Instead, I placed my own laptop on the table and connected it to the room's display system. "Before we discuss any offers, I'd like to share something Uncle Edward left for me. Something that affects not just Thornton Analytics, but the entire financial market, including the Callaway Family Fund." Victor's smile faltered. "That's not on the agenda." "I'm making it the agenda," I replied, typing commands to bring up Edwards' model, integrated with my own algorithms. According to Edwards' research that this company has been conducting for years, we're heading toward a systemic financial collapse within the next 2 years. Nervous glances circulated around the table. One of the executives leaned forward. "What kind of collapse are we talking about?" "Global. Comprehensive, and accelerated by exactly the kind of high-risk derivatives trading that the Callaway Fund has engaged in over the past 18 months. My father's face darkened. "This is absurd. You're a physicist, not a financial analyst." "Actually, I'm both now," I said. "And Edwards' data is conclusive. The modeling shows a 94% probability of cascading system failure beginning in the banking sector and rapidly spreading to commodities, currencies, and equity markets." I guided them through the model, explaining the interlocking factors and feedback loops that were creating an unprecedented vulnerability in the global financial structure. Several board members, particularly those with technical backgrounds, grew increasingly concerned as the presentation continued. "Even if this model is accurate," Victor interjected, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "what exactly do you propose we do about it?" "That's where my research comes in," I said, bringing up a new set of simulations. "By applying quantum algorithmic principles to market structures, we can identify and strengthen critical stability points before the collapse begins." "Quantum algorithms? For financial markets?" Victor scoffed. "This is exactly why you shouldn't be running this company. You're trying to turn it into your personal research playground." Actually, one of the senior analysts spoke up. "I've been following Professor Callaway's published work. His approaches to system stability are quite remarkable. If they could be applied to financial systems, they can, I confirmed. Edward saw the connection before I did. That's why he left me the company, not because I'm his nephew, but because combining my research with Thornton Analytics' data and market position creates a unique opportunity. An opportunity to do what, exactly? My father demanded. To prevent a global financial meltdown, I replied simply, and to position Thornton Analytics as the leader in a new approach to market stability and risk management. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Several board members were already pulling up my published papers on their tablets, connecting the dots Edward had seen months ago. Victor attempted one last offensive. This is all theoretical. You're asking us to bet the company's future on unproven academic models. No, I said quietly. I'm telling you, as a majority shareholder, that this is the direction Thornton Analytics will take under my leadership. Those who don't share this vision are welcome to tender their resignations. The meeting concluded without Victor's share purchase being discussed again. As the board members filed out, many of them already engaged in intense discussions about the implications of what I presented, my father lingered behind. You really believe this collapse is coming? He asked, his voice lacking its usual certainty. The data is conclusive, I replied, and we're uniquely positioned to address it if we act quickly. He studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Edward always said you were the smartest one in the family. I thought he was just being kind. You never bothered to find out. He nodded slowly. Perhaps it's time I did. Over the next 6 months, Thornton Analytics underwent a dramatic transformation under my leadership. We pivoted from pure financial analysis to developing what we called quantum resilient financial architecture, a framework for identifying and strengthening critical stability points in financial systems using principles derived from my quantum computing research. At first, the financial community viewed our approach with skepticism. But as our models began accurately predicting market microcorrections that traditional analytics missed, institutions started paying attention. By the 8-month mark, we were consulting for central banks and global financial institutions on stability mechanisms. Victor resigned from Thornton Analytics but remained at the helm of the Callaway Family Fund, stubbornly dismissing my warnings about their investment strategies. My father, surprisingly, began taking an interest in my work, occasionally sitting in on technical briefings and asking increasingly insightful questions. Then came the first tremors of the crash we predicted. A mid-sized investment bank in Europe collapsed overnight due to exposure to exactly the kind of complex derivatives our model had flagged as high risk. The contagion spread rapidly, just as we projected. But the institutions that had implemented our stability protocols weathered the initial shock. As the crisis accelerated, our client list grew exponentially. We weren't just analyzing the crash, we were actively helping to contain it. The Callaway Family Fund wasn't so fortunate. Victor had ignored my warnings, doubling down on high-risk positions that were now imploding spectacularly. In a single week, the fund lost 60% of its value. My father called me late one night, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Victor's asking for your help. The fund is in free fall. I tried to help 6 months ago, I reminded him. He wasn't interested. That was before. This is now. This is the family legacy, Daniel. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn recognition from a family that considered my work irrelevant. The dismissive comments, the missed graduations, the constant comparison to cousins who fit the family mold. I'll see what I can do, I finally said, not for Victor, but for the family members who would be devastated by the fund's collapse. The next day, I met Victor in his now somber office, surrounded by terminal screens displaying cascading losses. I suppose you're enjoying this, he said by way of greeting. I take no pleasure in being right about a financial catastrophe, I replied. But yes, there's a certain irony in you asking for my help after all these years of mockery. He stared at the screens, defeat written in the slump of his shoulders. Can you help? Or did you just come to witness the downfall? I can help, I said, opening my laptop. But things will change. The fund will need to adopt the stability protocols we've developed, and you'll need to resign as manager. His head snapped up. You want control of the family fund too? I don't want control of anything, Victor. I want stability in a system that's been dangerously imbalanced for too long. in the financial markets, and in our family. In the end, Victor agreed to my terms, not out of respect for my expertise, but out of desperation to salvage what remained of his reputation. The Callaway Family Fund was restructured under Thornton Analytics guidance, its high-risk positions unwound, its investment strategy realigned with the stability principles I developed. 1 year after Uncle Edward's will reading, I stood at the podium of the International Financial Summit, addressing central bankers, treasury secretaries, and financial leaders from around the world. The subject: how quantum algorithmic principles were reshaping our understanding of financial stability in a complex global system. My father sat in the front row, genuinely attentive for perhaps the first time in my life. Beside him was Dr. Eleanor Chen, the brilliant quantum physicist who had joined Thornton Analytics as our research director and who had, more recently, begun joining me for dinners that extended far beyond professional discussions. As I explained the elegant mathematics behind our stability protocols, I thought about Uncle Edward's letter. True wealth isn't measured in acquisitions or social status. It's measured in ideas. He had been right, of course. But he left out something important. Ideas only achieve their full value when they're implemented, when they move from theoretical possibility to practical reality, when they change not just how we think, but how we live. My inheritance hadn't really been Uncle Edward's money or his company. It had been his confidence that my ideas mattered, that they could change things that needed changing. As I concluded my presentation to enthusiastic applause, I noticed Victor standing at the back of the hall. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a small, reluctant nod of acknowledgement. Not quite respect, perhaps, but recognition. Sometimes that's enough. Later that evening, as Eleanor and I walked through the gardens of the conference center, she asked the question that had been on her mind all day. Was it worth it? Saving the family that never appreciated you? I considered this as we paused by a fountain, its waters catching the evening light. I didn't do it for appreciation, I said finally. I did it because it was the right application of the right idea at the right time. And the family recognition, your father's newfound respect, Victor's grudging acknowledgement? I smiled, thinking of all the years I craved exactly those things. They're like compound interest, nice to have, but not the principle I was investing in. Eleanor laughed, linking her arm through mine as we continued our walk. Professor Callaway, I do believe you've been spending too much time in the financial world. You're speaking in banking metaphors now. Maybe I agreed, or maybe I've just finally solved the inheritance equation, figuring out what to keep, what to transform, and what to leave behind. The real inheritance, after all, hadn't been what Uncle Edward left to me. It had been what I chose to build with it. And that was a calculation I'd gotten exactly right.